Well, hello and welcome to the latest in the NOFAS webinar series. Today we're going to be focusing on advocacy, and in particular this webinar has been promoted to the NOFAS affiliate network and also other leaders who have indicated their interest in serving as advocates, FASD advocates. I think we have a very important, I know that, but also entertaining presentation for you today. I think most people know that the FASD science and public health messages have advanced and are important, but they really do not lead to progress without being brought to life through the advocacy and the passion and motivation of those of you who have real-world story to tell and experiences when it comes to FASD as professionals in the field, and of course in some cases as those with loved ones living with FASD. NOFAS is reigniting its advocacy efforts to look at long-term initiatives to make progress and also to be opportunistic when there are policymakers or there are issues that we can quickly talk about this issue and address the FASD. So today you're going to hear the latest when it comes to outreach at the federal, state, and local levels. They're all important. And keep in mind when we talk about advocacy, it's not just legislative advocacy, but policy efforts. We'll also there'll be opportunities to continue to interact with NOFAS, whether you need support on your advocacy efforts or you want to connect in with the larger FASD advocacy coalition that NOFAS is a part of. So I'm delighted to turn the presentation over to the NOFAS Public Policy Coordinator, Cameron Koo. Cameron?
Thank you, Tom. Welcome everybody to the NOFAS affiliate advocacy training. We're very happy you've taken the time to take a look at this. A little bit about me. I've joined NOFAS recently in the last 3 months to help advance the advocacy Tom was talking about. We've been facilitating some congressional meetings. I have a background in political campaigns and political research, as well as some brief experience on the Hill in the past, and of course with NOFAS. I've picked up a lot about advocacy over the course of that time and crowdsourced some very important lessons there. So I think you'll find that these are some tried and true examples of how you can advance your cause in a way that's productive and efficient. There's no need to take notes during this presentation unless you want to. It's going to move relatively fast. Don't feel the need to read every slide in full. It's going to be made available to you after the fact. I'd also like to draw your attention to the handouts. I've posted 5 of them. They're each relevant to a subject that we're going to be covering during this webinar. We also have a spot for questions. I'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation. I strongly encourage you to write those if you have them throughout, and I'll pick them up later, and hopefully we'll address them all. If you have questions afterward, feel free to email me, cameron@nofas.org. You can even call me. My number should be right there on your screen. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to cover 3 main topics over the course of this webinar. First, we're going to go into basics of advocacy. Some of you might know this, but it's always helpful to review and provide kind of a framework for what we're doing here. So, advocacy, basically, you know, you're looking to influence an outcome in public policy, and this really takes a similar form for FASD, regardless of if you're an affiliate organization or an advocate yourself, a friend of NOFAS. You know, these considerations are going to be relevant to you. So we're going to go through the scope of that advocacy, some unique challenges that you might face there, and then a brief overview of the levels of advocacy, then we'll be moving on. So first of all, with scope. When I talk about scope, I mean there are some issues with FASD advocacy that can make it more difficult or can make it more awkward to get your message across. One is a huge amount of misinformation or disinformation. When you're meeting with lawmakers, you'll often find that they're not aware of the problem, that they're not aware of the gravity of the problem, that they have a general understanding, or that they're committed to the belief that FASD only takes on, you know, the symptoms with, you know, the facial symptoms of FASD. So that's to say, you know, the understanding of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders is necessarily narrow or non-existent with a lot of people just because the information isn't out there, and that's part of our job. The other thing is that it has a very wide array of policy impacts. It'll have to do with anything from mental health to education to criminal justice, and you'll find that people are very, very specialized when they work in any sort of legislative space, whether that's state legislative or at the federal level. So you're going to have to deal with a lot of impacts that, you know, might not necessarily fit into one box, but everyone's going to want to look at it in the context of that box. And that moves on to our next set of unique challenges. The cause of this disorder is known. A lot of other issues, like with autism, you're going to find is kind of a, you know, black box into what causes it. You know, there's not a consensus there, or when we're looking at something, you know, bigger like cancer, you know, there isn't a huge answer, but when it comes to FASD, the answer is clearly, you know, avoiding drinking during pregnancy. So it's a bit of a different issue that way. There's immense social stigma. I'm sure you're all aware of that. And limited science to diagnose the full spectrum of disorders. So, you know, the prevalence is something that we can't exactly pin down because it could be so much larger than we believe it is. So looking at the levels of advocacy, at the top we have policymakers, you know, your congressmen, your senators. Then you'll have lobbyists, so, you know, groups that seek to influence government, that are paid, that have a massive infrastructure. And then you're going to have people who are professionals who understand a field. I'm sure many of you meet that description as well. You know, who have an advanced understanding of it. And then you have the grassroots level, people who experience you know, these disorders, who are connected to them personally, and who have you know, a compelling experience to share. So that's just relevant to break down for you if you want to consider it. I think this pyramid is a good tool for that. And so to back out for a second, you know, that's just a very general overview of advocacy. Remember, you can put up any questions you like at any time, but I think most of that is relatively straightforward. Now we're going to get into something a little more technical. We're going to go into contacting Congress. So there are some tips and tricks, but there are also some important distinctions to know about the kinds of staffers you'll deal with and how to address certain people that you'll interact with based on their title to give you a better understanding of their responsibilities. And so that first comes down to a distinction I like and has been around for a while now on the Hill, called wonks versus mechanics. So wonks refer, it's the word no backwards. So these are people who have a really intricate understanding of policy issues, and they most often have or are pursuing advanced degrees. They can have PhDs, they can have JDs, they can end up you know, being people with multiple master's degrees. Wonks are people who are actually writing policy, and you know, they seek to make a difference through that kind of service. Mechanics, on the other hand, are of a more political nature. They have an administrative focus. Their job is to see things executed and get them done. You'll find that these two distinctions actually do overlap in some more senior roles, but it's a pretty clear-cut distinction when you're advocating. So looking at wants first. Every office is going to be different when you're considering the types of staffers that you're going to interact with. So, you know, certain offices may use certain titles differently, but what you have to pay attention to is who is taking the leadership on a legislative portfolio. So, you know, a legislative portfolio could be childcare, it could be healthcare, it could be Native American issues, and 3 separate people could be dealing with each of those, which is a challenge for someone advocating on this subject, because we'd want to be talking to each of those people. Tom and I have been in meetings where a staffer has actually brought in another legislative assistant to come listen because we segued into a topic that he felt was more relevant to that staffer than himself. So let's go through the different kinds of legislative staffers you'll see on the Hill, around the Hill, or contact from at home. So legislative correspondents are abbreviated LC. They're the lower level of dedicated legislative staffers. In the House of Representatives, you know, you're going to find a much smaller staff size. So these people are often going to have a lot of policy areas they're dealing with. Sometimes one LC will cover multiple LA's portfolios just because they're, you know, taking on something of an administrative role at certain points, but every office is different. Sometimes they're the equivalent of LAs, and they'll take on a much larger responsibility. That happens more often in the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate is prone to gradually promoting people internally within offices, so you'll find that certain LCs are going to actually be the lead on an issue that maybe the senator isn't huge about. For instance, you know, Bob Casey, senator from Pennsylvania, has a legislative correspondent who deals with certain veterans' mental health issues, and she's the lead on that, but she's the legislative correspondent for foreign policy, which is one of the senator's top issues. He used to sit on that committee. So that's an important thing to remember. Legislative correspondents are very worth talking to, but generally speaking, you want to be in touch with legislative assistants. These are the top advisors for any member or senator on that specific issue that they deal with in their portfolio. In the House of Representatives, they deal with a larger swath of responsibility than in the Senate, but still they may be more specialized than their LCs. They almost always have advanced degrees. It's pretty rare to see one come up from a campaign and become a legislative assistant. I have seen it happen multiple times, but in most cases you can rely on them having a pretty strong degree of technical knowledge. In the Senate, they're, you know, some of the top staffers in their areas. You know, they come from pools of hundreds. You can definitely assume a certain level of proficiency, and they've usually been on the Hill for quite a number of years. Then lastly, we want to talk about legislative fellows and aides. So legislative fellows are sort of like Capitol Hill postdoc a lot of the time. They will sometimes come in, be unpaid for a year, and then be promoted to legislative assistant. It's, you know, hard to pinpoint what a legislative fellow does, but if you get a meeting with one, don't shrug it off. They're not a glorified intern. They're an advisor, and they were brought in because of their specific knowledge of that kind of policy area. Legislative aides, these really are a very vague category. They're not a legislative assistant. They are not an LA. but legislative aides, you know, sometimes double as staff assistants in House offices, but I've also, you know, seen them in positions that place them somewhere between an LA and an LC. So it's just a relevant consideration. Um, then, you know, we're going to take a look at mechanics. Essentially, mechanics, you know, they exist on the congressional side, but are more prevalent on the political side. Now, the political side being, you know, basically anything where a senator or congressman is operating not in their capacity as a public servant, but as a politician, you know, seeking some objective. So, you know, when they're talking with donors, when they're seeking re-election, that's when political operatives come into play. So on the congressional side, you're going to see quite a few different sorts of mechanics, and they're relevant to talk to in quite a few situations. So first of all, schedulers, special assistants, and executive assistants, you know, they can be anything from entry level to senior staff in a lot of situations. Sometimes they have speech writing responsibilities. Sometimes, you know, they do the mail. But special assistants, executive assistants, and schedulers usually are very pressed for time because usually they control the time of someone much more important than themselves in that office. You know, basically exercising some degree of political judgment to, you know, make sure that the senator, congressman, or chief of staff is spending their time in the most efficient way. And, you know, that is a mechanic sort of job. Chiefs of staff, deputy chiefs of staff, and legislative directors have a combination of kind of wonk and mechanic qualifications. You know, these people are often senior advisors to senators and congressmen. Sometimes they're office managers, but they're very worth knowing as separate roles. Every office is going to have a chief of staff, a deputy chief of staff, and a legislative director in it. Communications and press staffers, you know, their job on the congressional side is to make known the work that's being done in that office. You know, they're looking for something marketable and something that they can explain to constituents. And we're going to go into kind of communications a bit more later, but what's important to recognize is that you know, they have a very specific set of responsibilities, and it's not necessarily going to be, you know, entirely political. Often it's just about showing that they're a good public servant. So on the political side, you know, most sitting representatives and senators have at least one political employee. That is someone who's paid out of their political action committee and not by the government. Every House member is being reelected every 2 years, so often they're campaigning all the time. And they have to often become a jack of all trades. My background is in political campaigns, and I can tell you from experience that you have to be able to confidently communicate with a wide variety of people on a regular basis, even more so than when you're dealing with you know, constituents as someone working in a House office. You know, people have a very specific agenda when they talk to you in a political capacity, but it's a very useful avenue to get mentioned, and you can do so without, you know, actually ever taking a side. So just a brief outline of kind of the structure of political employees within a campaign. There are other departments to campaigns, but these are the relevant ones for consideration. The political department, these are people who secure endorsements, who secure support from community leaders, and who continue to build and facilitate relationships for you know, the campaign with major stakeholders. And, you know, these jobs can be kind of nebulous. They also often provide policy advice or perspective. I would say that a policy advisor on a campaign would be a political department role. Finance department, these people are concerned with making money and at the same time, staying consistent with the values of the person they're working for. They're the first hires and the last fires on any campaign because campaigns do not run without money, but they also engage in a lot of research. You don't want to be someone running for office and taking money from a drug dealer's brother. That's a poor idea. But so they have those considerations, but they are a relevant group to know because they have a specific set of responsibilities on a campaign, and because they're often the first people in the door, they'll be answering questions for the campaign. I've many times seen someone's finance director eventually just escalate to being their campaign manager as a result of the fact that they were there first and understand the operation best. And lastly, communications, they're marketing this person for election or re-election. They strike a different tone. It's more adversarial. They'll go negative against an opponent more often, and they'll be able to talk directly about, voting from where they are. While on the other side, on the congressional side, communications staffers have a very clear line before, they can't put out endorsements from a congressional office. That's, that would be kind of an illegal bit of activity because there's got to be that line between public service and political activism. But for our consideration, it's very useful to understand that that campaigns can be an incredible avenue for advocacy. They give you the opportunity to, present information to these candidates for higher public office. You can give them the opportunity to stand behind your cause. You just can't endorse them if you're a 501c3. If you're a 501c4, I think you can endorse them, but in most cases it's a 501c3 situation. So you want to make yourself important to these groups of people, running the campaign, because those promises hopefully get followed up on, and it helps spread awareness, because the real advertising money and showboating comes during any campaign, and that's when politicians want to show the issues that they want to be active on. So it's definitely not something to neglect, and should be an important sphere of your approach moving forward, especially going into a highly contentious campaign season when people are going to want something that everyone can agree with, like trying to drive down the rates of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. So contacting staffers, there are a few ways to make sure you get heard and contacted above, just calling the office and asking for a meeting. So for meetings, getting meetings is important, but if you don't prepare, if you're not ready for it, then you're going to find it will be mostly useless to you. There's definitely an etiquette level involved, but mostly it's about if people feel that you have something to be meeting with them about, and that you have something to offer their agenda. So let's go into preparation. Before you go to a meeting on the Hill or in your state capital, there are a few things you need. First of all, you should always know exactly where you're headed and who you are going to be talking to. You can easily look up, the office building and the number in the office building where you're going, and you should be aware of the exact name of the staffer that you'll be talking to that day, because that's one of the first things you'll be asked. And you know, if you seem ambivalent walking in, I don't know, I have a meeting with someone in this office who deals with healthcare, that doesn't set a very good precedent. You need to bring at least some sort of information. So, you know, when it's the House, you want to bring something relevant to the district. Here are the service providers in your district that give resources for families dealing with FASD. Here is a study that was funded in your district, you know, for our affiliate organization. This is the research that was done in the place that you represent. And you need to bring a business card. That's often kind of mandatory, or they'll have you write down your contact information. People want to be able to follow up with you. And lastly, look prepared. Obviously, business professional is what's considered acceptable on the Hill. And, you know, there are plenty of guides to that. And you should also bring something to take notes with. If you walk in completely empty-handed, or just with a flyer that you hand them and you sit across the table, then that says what you have to say is important, but what the other person might have to say isn't as important. These things might seem simple, but they're useful to remember. When you're discussing with them, the major thing you need is an ask. You need to come to the table with something that they can help you with, that's something they can do or support to make your organization happy, to act, you know, in the interest of your advocacy. If you just come and say we exist, you'll get the equivalent of a so what. So in the attachments folder on this presentation, I'll draw your attention to legislation to keep an eye on. That's an Excel document. It lists just a few pieces of legislation that have been introduced in this Congress that I think are very relevant to the issue of FASD. But the other big thing that especially those of you coming to the Affiliate Summit will want to be thinking about is the President's budget is going to slash NIH, and with it the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, as well as CDC, which has multiple line items for FAS and FASD research and resources. And if those get cut, that's a big issue. Obviously, Congress is going to respond with a different budget, but that's something that we want to be talking about now. After the meeting, you know, to really make sure it counts, make sure to save your notes, transcribe them, make sure you know exactly what happened, how much progress you made, because, you know, often you can just end up rehashing things over and over again if you're not keeping tabs on exactly where you are with different offices and people. Save all business cards you receive in the office and follow up with them. Make sure to thank them for their time and for their interest in the issue, even if they sat there and didn't really seem to fully engage the issue. You know, they did take the time to hear you out, and it's important to show your appreciation for that. Often working on the Hill can be a very thankless job in many offices, and you know, it's worth it to make sure that you know that you appreciate their time. You can also send a card. It'll take weeks to clear and process. If you meet with a member or senator, definitely send a card after the meeting is over. So that's the basics of contacting Congress, but there's a tip that I think will be very relevant here. We're going to look very briefly at CapWiz. Some of you might be familiar with this, but this is essential to getting heard when you're going on the Hill. Essentially, if you want to find out the contact information for anyone working for a senator or congressman, you search CapWiz and the person's name. So right now we're looking at Tom Carper from Delaware. The first thing that shows up is CapWiz Action Center BioID. A lot of organizations pay for CapWiz, and you can find this online as long as you just Google CapWiz and the person's name. So this is what comes up when you click that link. You get a bio on them. You get general contact information, their committee assignments. You can even see their political action committee contributions, so that kind of intersects political and public service there. And then you get their staff. So there is a very simple formula to finding out the email for anyone working for a senator. So let's say we want to schedule a meeting with Senator Tom Carper himself. We would want to talk to the scheduler. That's Brian Mack here. Now, if we wanted to talk to Brian Mack, what we do, just pay attention in the URL bar right here. There's his name. So first what we do, we eliminate the space, create an underscore there, then at, and then you give the senator's name, so carper.senate.gov. And that will actually give you Brian Mack's email. You send in your scheduling request and say, hello, this is my organization, this is what we do. We're going to be in Washington at this time, or we can be in Washington at this time, or in the district. This works in district as well. Please take the time to meet with us. We would appreciate it, and then they'll respond back. Alternatively, if we wanted to do this with a legislative staffer, we'd want to contact the Health LA. That's Lynn Shaw right there. Lynn Shaw. So eliminate the space, underscore, at carper.senate.gov. All right, the only difference is, let's say Tom Carper were a congressman. If he were in Congress, we would do the same thing. You'd contact their scheduler for a member meeting and the legislative assistant for, a meeting with the legislative assistant. So if Lynn Shaw was working for Congressman Tom Carper in the House of Representatives, you do not do an underscore, you do a dot at mail.house.gov. So you eliminate the congressman's name. I mean, there are so many of them, plenty share a last name, so it wouldn't make sense to do it like they do it in the Senate. That's a key trick to being able to contact people that you want to speak to. CapWiz is a godsend in that department, so please remember this very important aspect to contacting these offices, because otherwise you're likely to get shut out or drowned out in someone who's trying to talk about a conspiracy theory or trying to bait someone into an angry response. You don't want to get stuck out there. You want to be talking to the people you want to be talking to immediately. There's no point to go through extra steps. So back in here, we're going to take a look at communications. So this isn't a communications workshop, but there are a few things that are very useful to you when you're talking to the press and to political communications operatives. First of all, we're going to want to go over press lists and releases. So if your organization is doing something, you're going to want to be able to release that to the relevant media in your state. So I believe Susan Ellsworth is on. I have a little example here. It's very easy, if you don't have a press list accessible to you, to find, and basically create one. All you have to do is go to, let's take the Indiana Star as the largest publication in Indiana. We go to their website, and it's not immediately obvious how would I get in touch with with a reporter. So what you want to do is you want to go all the way to the bottom, and come up, and there we are. Contact us and follow our staff. Now, I went for follow our staff, and we get a directory right away. It's actually that easy. You could email the president of the Indiana Star, but I would recommend going down to the editorial pages. Suzette Hackney would be a good person. Put all of these people on your press list. Send out a press release to each of them. It's a total godsend to have a strong press list. Invest some time in making one. It'll get you earned media. It will get you out there, and it won't cost a thing. So before we get back to that, I want to mention to you that there is a sample press release in the folder. This is one that I used for a state senate campaign in which actually my candidate endorsed this nonprofit group that actually assimilated New Hampshire NOFAS, New Futures. They're doing very good work in their state. We put out a simple press release that said we are endorsing their stance on the issue of the opioid epidemic because it's such a big issue in New Hampshire. And we gave a very brief summary of what we liked about it, gave a direct quote from Joe Casey, the candidate, and he'd written an op-ed the week before about confronting the opioid crisis as a community. And so he connected this nonprofit's message that they marketed to our campaign to the narrative that he was building in local media. And in so doing, spread more information about this group, New Futures, and also, helped his own chances at winning a campaign and helped increase his name recognition by talking about something that people care about and, is an important consideration for any public servant in that area. So I strongly suggest you just take a look at the press release. We have a letterhead for immediate release. We have the date, we have a name of someone, and we have a telephone number to contact. Usually you would also send this out in an email. You would send it in a PDF form as well as in the body of the email, and you would also include an email address if that's favorable. Context is also very important. Instead of Joe Casey as a candidate for New Hampshire State Senate, you would want to have something like Arkansas None for Nine is a nonprofit group working in Arkansas to help provide resources and education to families dealing with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. So that's something that is relevant. But moving on, we want to take a look at op-eds and letters to the editor. So the easiest way to get into the paper is just to submit something. Instead of saying a press release on which they have to write an article, actually write it for them. So the easiest way to do that is a letter to the editor. They're usually limited at 250 words. In the handout section, you'll find two sample letters to the editor, one having to do with federal advocacy, saying that a congressman should not support cuts to the NIH and CDC. You'll also find one based around Carol Rangel's organization in Arkansas submitted a request for funding for a study on FASD and criminal justice. And this is a letter to the editor that you could write for someone and they could sign their name onto and submit themselves. That's a perfectly legitimate, fine thing to do. If they don't feel like writing one, if they feel like writing one, go for it. and basically they say, hey, pay attention to this. You'd be surprised at how many people read the letters to the editor, how many people inform themselves based off of that information. The other more in-depth option for you is to go with an op-ed. Op-eds opposite the editorials, or often referred to as opinion editorials, usually have to come from someone with some sort of qualification to speak on the issue, to be able to discuss it with authority. And I've included 2 sample op-eds as well as attachments in the handouts section. 2 op-eds that I happen to like, written about FASD. And one advocates a policy change in Massachusetts. The other is just informing people about FASD, the implications of FASD. So those, what you can do here is you can inform people, you can call them to action, you can do all of these different things, and then you can aggregate this earned media and say for your organization, look at how often we've been in the paper, look at how often we've been in local media, we're worth talking about, and that gives you more authority when you send out press releases to a press list of reporters who if you weren't constantly putting up op-eds and letters to the editor, might not pay attention to you as much. So, a lot of this is about building capacity for effective communications. The other thing that I want to discuss briefly is bulleting. This is a little known practice among political operatives, and particularly effective for people looking to one second. Bulleting is basically this form of political research. It's often used in opposition research to tell an objective story about how a candidate might have done something bad. So you could create a series of bullets based on Jeb Bush's ties to the Lehman Brothers that, says Jeb Bush worked for the Lehman Brothers then, the Lehman Brothers did this in Florida, the Lehman Brothers did that in Florida, they overlapped at this time, and this is this is how you should think about it. But you have to stay very objective when you do it. That's why opposition research people like them. But they're also very effective when you're just trying to tell a story to a reporter. Boiling down information, giving a source. I have a couple of research bullets about FASD formed from the CDC fact sheet in the handouts folder. I think that they're useful. If you're trying to include these in a press release, I think it's a good idea. You want to use it in more of a campaign-oriented capacity. If you're trying to communicate with a campaign's political department, you can say, hey, this is what our organization does, and then include a series of research bullets that say, this is why FASD advocacy is important, and then go, FASD can affect up to 1 in 20 school children, things about the prevalence, things about the effects, and what this will hopefully go to, and you can even designate it when you contact a campaign, would you please forward this on to the research director? Research operatives communicate almost exclusively in bullets. And they also happen to fill out questionnaires for candidates that say, where do you stand on this or that policy? You want to be able to get yourself into that thought space. Even if you're not endorsing candidates, when they answer questions about healthcare, they should know that FASD is an important consideration to them. So that's, that's something you arm their research department with. It doesn't matter if they're Republicans or Democrats or the Green Party or Libertarians. You want to make sure that whoever you're talking to understands the story told objectively to them about what FASDs are and how they affect the constituency and why it's important to be on the right side of this issue. So, going through all of that, I believe we're about at the Yep. Oh, here are some bullets for you to take a look at. So these are some decent examples of how to write a very simple bullet. It transfers information very quickly, and boils it down. You don't want to say FASDs are terrible. You want to say that they'll have implications, that can be mental and behavioral. And then you go into detail on what those are. Then you give the source of it, and you give a date, which ideally you include a link. Oh no, I think I've started Safari. You include a link that they can click or copy down and see exactly where it came from. That's how reporters often like to receive citations when you're trying to communicate something quickly. So, questions. Let's Jackie Willie brings up something very useful. One thing, is that a preponderance of professionals don't know a thing about FASD and should. And that's a big barrier in the field. And that's another great avenue for you to give, some important testimony for FASD advocacy, is to bring more professionals into your circle, because they can build a network. Advocating to professionals is hugely important, and you'll find that nurses unions have regular meetings, SEIU. You want to be talking to these people who provide these services, because they can spread awareness in the field. Advocacy doesn't have to just be with government or people running for public office. You want to definitely be approaching there. Thank you very much for that note. I really appreciate that, Jackie. Another question, to be an effective advocate when I meet with policymakers, is it more important for me to tell my story and talk about my personal experiences and needs, or should I talk about how FASD affects my district and state as a whole, or both? I think that you want to go with both. You want to definitely, make sure that you have an ask in there, though. Your personal experiences, hopefully you can connect them to something like, and if this legislation were around, this might not have been a problem. For instance, one of the pieces of legislation that we're keeping an eye on is the Timely Mental Health in Foster Youth Act, which increases screening requirements in the foster care system for mental health, and then requires follow-up screenings if there are any flags raised. Well, a big thing that, that's a very helpful thing, because there are so many people in the foster care system who are affected by FASD. And so you want to, definitely be able to talk about, I know someone who, adopted a child who ended up having, these special needs. And a lot of people, might not be prepared for that, or might not know that. The other thing is Senator Heitkamp recently introduced the Tribal Parity in Adoption Act, which basically creates parity for tribal communities in terms of the subsidy given for special needs adoptions, which means that, often people might adopt within the tribal community and find that a kid has FASD, but they can't get the extra kind of money that they need to provide effective care. So, these kinds of things are definitely relevant. Let's see. If I want to take action as an advocate and I travel to Washington, D.C., can NOFAS coordinate means for me, provide me with talking points and handouts, and go to Capitol Hill with me? Yes, 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 and yes. Those of you coming to the Affiliate Summit will be very well prepared. Obviously, the political landscape is experiencing kind of constant tectonic shifts, to put it lightly, and we don't know necessarily what's going to be important in a few weeks, but we can approximate what we'll need to do, and we will definitely make sure you're well prepared before going into any meeting, accompany you, and also make sure we get information out about what you're doing, and the fact that you've gone up for a meeting. Social media is an excellent avenue to let people know that you're doing the job of advocacy, and when people see you doing something like that actively, more people want to join. That's how all these marches get so big. And that about concludes all the questions that I have. I really appreciate you all taking the time. We're going to be posting this presentation on the NOFAS website within the next 24 hours with some of these handout documents. As I said before, it's a great idea to download legislation to watch, sample bullets for FASD, sample campaign press release, sample letters to the editor, and sample op-eds. All of those are useful. Try doing an op-ed or even a letter to the editor this week. Get your voice out there. Be talking about how people need to really defend the funding that goes toward this incredibly important issue, and make sure that more people understand it. And like Jackie said, it's incredibly important to make sure that not only public servants but professionals are aware of this, and there are lots of avenues through advocacy where you can improve that. All right, thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely Tuesday afternoon or evening.